Mel from Sallendria Cosplay, and welcome to my first video tutorial on basic embroidery. We're going to review the supplies that you need, and then we're going to go through 4 basic stitches. The first would be stem stitch, then satin stitch, then lazy daisies, and French knots. So let's get started. So when you're embroidering, there are a few things that you're going to need. Obviously, you need some sort of fabric. That is where you're going to be embroidering onto, and it's pretty much your blank canvas. To start, I'm just using it's a thick cotton, not quite a canvas. It's a scrap that I had laying around. So it doesn't have to be fancy, especially when you're beginning, because you're just going to be practicing. So anything you have lying around, anything you find cheap at the store, go for it. It'll work perfectly.
Continue.
The second thing you're going to need is embroidery floss. I usually use DMC. They're known for having really good color matching, and they have a lot of selection. It's usually what you find when you go to the craft store in the embroidery floss section, so you're probably going to be good to go, but it doesn't have to be that brand. There are a bunch of different brands. You can also buy like bulk packs where it has popular colors, things like that. They're usually a lot cheaper, and if you're just starting out, not sure what you're doing, you don't need to spend a lot of money. But embroidery floss. You're obviously also going to need a needle. You might not be able to see this on camera, but it's a needle, and I usually use one with a slightly bigger eye and a nice point on the end, so it goes through your fabric pretty well. Lastly, you're going to need an embroidery hoop. If you don't use an embroidery hoop, you can still embroider, but your stitches are not going to be right. They're going to be a little looser, your fabric's going to get bunch up and get kind of yucky, so you don't want to do that. So an embroidery hoop is going to keep your fabric nice and tight so that when you go back and forth through it, everything stays nice, your stitches get a lot prettier, and everything works out much better in the end. There are 2 kinds of embroidery hoops you can get out there. There are ones that are wooden, and then there are these plastic ones. The plastic ones I think might be a little cheaper, but they also have the added bonus of this little edge at the top of the hoop. So what happens is, when you put your fabric on here and you tighten into the hoop, this little edge comes up over the top and holds it even tighter so that you have a much better surface to work with. And then it stays nice and taut, almost like a trampoline. And I realize I went really fast there, but I will show you how to put fabric in an embroidery hoop. So when you're embroidering, you're going to need some sort of pattern to follow. You can go to the store and buy pre-made things. The way that these work is it's usually some sort of lighter colored fabric with a blue outline on it. That is where you do your stitching. So these are easy to find. Pretty much any craft store will have towels, aprons, bags, you name it, they got it. And all you will do then is follow the lines, make your own color schemes, or sometimes they have instructions in them. That is the easy, more expensive way to do it. What I like to do for practicing is making these practice pieces. All you need is that piece of fabric that I showed you earlier and a marker. I used a ruler to make some nice straight lines. I also made some squiggly lines, and then I made some flowers and shapes and dots and whatnot, and then you just will go through it, obviously, but you just use this and you just practice over and over again. Use your scrap fabric, use a marker you have laying around. It doesn't matter, because if you see the lines, no one's gonna see it. It's practice. You'll probably throw it away or give it to your mom and hang it on the fridge. I did actually take one of these practice pieces and I stitched one up just to show you how it's going to look when you're done. You basically follow along and you make this pretty bunch of random shapes. So let's try to put our fabric in our embroidery hoop. So you'll want to get your embroidery hoop and your fabric. Your embroidery hoop has a screw at the top and 2 pieces. The screw tightens and loosens to hold your hoop in place. You'll loosen it and then remove your center. For a plastic hoop, you have this edge at the top, so you want to make sure that your fabric goes on that side of the piece. So I'll move this over here. So we have our piece of fabric, or we have our lower hoop and our piece of fabric. To start, it actually will probably be easier to have it down on the floor, a table, some sort of solid surface, until you get used to actually popping them together and figuring them out. This gives you the leverage of pushing things down onto the surface. So we'll take our hoop, we'll center our fabric over it. This is where your pattern would be. This is where you're going to be stitching. So if you have a pattern that goes outside of this hoop, you'll stitch, release, move, stitch until you fill the whole area. So if you have a giant piece, it doesn't matter how little your hoop is. You'll still be able to get to everything. You just have to make sure that you unscrew this, remove it, reposition, and then tighten your hoop again. So right now for this piece, I'm just going to center it. You're going to take your loosened hoop, push it on top, and make sure it fits. Let me loosen the screw a little bit. Alright, so then you're going to push it down. You might have to lift underneath to push the bottom hoop through a little bit more. And you'll see it's getting nice and tight, and your fabric's getting tight in here. And you're going to push this down until that little edge comes out. And then you'll tighten the screw at the top until it doesn't tighten anymore. I will warn you, sometimes this hurts your fingers, but you'll get used to it. It has a textured surface, so you can get a nice grip on it, but that textured surface obviously does not like skin. So you would get it nice and tight, and now you have your hoop. So now we're going to talk about preparing your needle and thread. First, we're going to talk about your thread just a little bit more. If you buy an embroidery floss like DMC, they are going to have a color number on here. This is actually really helpful when you're either buying patterns or when you need all of the same color. They are really good about color matching, so anytime you get number 758, it's going to look the same. So I'm going to teach you a little trick that my mom taught me. When you have your skein of thread, you're going to have a little piece sticking out here, and you have these two labels. If you take your first and thumb and then wrap your pinky around the second one and hold it nice and tight, and then gently pull this piece of thread, it's actually going to just come out nice and evenly, no tangles, and it's going to keep everything nice and in your skein. So as you work further, everything's still organized in these nice pretty skeins. And then you just snip it off after you have a decent length of thread. Now, when you're embroidering, you don't use this full strand of thread. You actually use half of it. If you look at the end, you'll notice that there are 6 strands of thread twisted together. What we're going to do is take 3 of them, which sometimes is a lot easier said than done. So you'll have 3 strands on this side, 3 strands on this side. And you'll just go and pull them, and if you hold it in the air, it untwists itself and comes apart nice and clean. So you'll take this half that you are not going to use right now and put it aside, because after you run out of thread, you're going to use that half, so there's no waste. Then you'll just take your needle, thread it as usual. If you are not good at threading needles, I would suggest getting a needle threader, which is a little piece of metal with tiny little metal opening, it's like a wire opening at the bottom. You just shove it through the eye of your needle. It's a lot larger surface to get your thread through, and it makes things a million times easier when you're still learning. The last thing to do with your thread is to tie a nice, pretty knot at the end, so that when you take it through the fabric the first time, it doesn't pop out. So you just want to have a nice knot that holds the... What you're going to do is you're going to come up from the back with your needle and just make one single straight stitch along the line. Next, you're going to come up on the line about half the distance of this full stitch. Next, you're going to go and put your needle in on the line, pushing this other stitch slightly to the side. And you're going to repeat that, keeping your stitches the same length and continuing by pushing your first stitch to the same side and stitching halfway down, then going halfway up, pushing it over again. And what this does is creates a slightly twisted effect, almost like a piece of rope laying on top of your piece of fabric. It will take some time to practice to getting your stitches the same length and nice and even. But once you practice, you'll start getting a lot better at it, and it will start looking absolutely perfect.
That's good.
Alright, next we'll talk about satin stitch. Satin stitch is how you fill in solid shapes. To here, you see I filled in a square or a rectangle, since it's not perfectly square. What you'll do is, again, you'll just come up from behind and you'll do a straight stitch to fill up that whole side. And you'll keep your needle nice and close to the first stitch along the border of whatever shape you're working on to fill up the space. You just want to make sure they're nice and close. Do I need to start over?
No, you
Okay.
can just keep going.
Sometimes you'll find that you go just a little too far over, and you'll get a gap in here. So then all you have to do is come back in between those two stitches and fill it in. No one will ever know that you accidentally skipped a space. The same process will be used regardless of whatever shape you're making, whether it be a circle, a squiggle, a triangle, or a square. You're just going to keep going from border to border and filling it in. So the next stitch we're going to do is called the lazy daisy, and it's going to make these little loopies here. Now this one is a lot different than the last two. So what you'll do is you'll come up, bring your thread to the top. Now the easiest way to do it is to just take the thread and hold it with your finger on your other opposite hand. Then you'll put your needle down through the fabric and you'll pull, but you're not going to pull it all the way tight. You want to keep this loop out here. Then you're going to bring your needle up inside your little loop, I guess would be the best way. And now you'll pull it tight. And you'll see that this thread keeps it from going all the way in. And then you'll just go right back in on the other side of the loop. And now you have a petal. So I'm going to do that one more time for you here. Bring your thread up. Hold it off to the side. Go back in. Come up inside of the loop. This is the topmost part of the thread. Pull it nice and tight, and then you're just going to tack it down there on the other side. And when you do clusters of these, they turn out to be really pretty little flowers or decorative edges. Oops. And there is your lazy daisy, which was my favorite stitch growing up as a kid. So our last stitch is the French knot. This, you're going to come up from the back, And then what you're going to do, and this is usually done best in like your lap or on a table, because your embroidery hoop, you're going to need both your hands to work with your thread. So, or you can try to brace it against your tummy, like I'm trying to do for the camera, but I would highly advise against it until you're really comfortable doing French knots. So you'll take your needle, and you take your thread, and you wrap it around 3 times. So you have this nice coil around the needle, and then you put the needle right back into the fabric. Now the best thing to do is to hold it with this hand, and then pull your thread, and if you pull it nice and slowly, if you go too fast, it can create knots, tangle up, make a mess. So you want to, that last one you want to do nice and slowly. So we're going to pull it up through the bottom, wrap it around our needle 3 times, and then put it back into the fabric, holding with our other hand, and then pulling nice and gently, and then we have a nice little knot that sits on top like that. When you're running out of thread, you're going to want to come onto the back of your fabric. You'll take your needle, loop it into another piece of stitching, pull it, and then this little loop that you made, take your thread through it and tie a nice little knot. And then you just need scissors and you trim it off. Voila! Things. Lazy daisies. And things. Stuff. Stuff. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection is complete? Wouldn't you think I'm a girl? The girl who has everything! Embroidery. So, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, you can find me on my Facebook page, Sallendria Cosplay. And thanks for watching. Do 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 do.